Hey folks, this is Tolly and welcome to Game Dev. Today we're going to be taking a look at some bugs and polish. The last few streams over the last few weeks and the last couple days here have been more focused on kind of building up mechanics. Yesterday we took a really hard look at changing it up so that we could track how much of a room was revealed and reward a cutscene when that room was fully revealed, as well as making it so that experience could be gained individually on each of our skills. And the last few weeks were a lot of other kind of like big features like checkpoints and combos, but I kind of want to just take today to kind of look at some of the bugs we've been having and kind of just polish up some things that really need some love. And we've been moving fast on bigger tasks, so it's going to be a lot of little bite-sized things today. Specifically, let's take a look at the pure ref that we made on Monday of a lot of the tasks that we need to do. I think I'd like to try and figure out what's going on with the game breaking when the unit dies. We realized at the end of last stream, having to do with the fact that we now keep track of your health and other stats between runs. It used to be that every time you loaded into any room, it was creating a new prefab version of the unit, and those stats were their default form, whatever was in the prefab. But we actually made it so that the stats are actually retained between areas, and our skill tree system can increase those stats. But because we never reset the health on death or on starting a new run, that means once a character's health reaches 0, it's forever 0. And if the character's health is ever 0, it automatically gains the knocked out status effect, which if it's knocked out, the back-end combat controller state machine removes that character from the list, and because there's no player units in the list, the game breaks. So this seems like a pretty clear-cut, understanding of what's happening, but I don't have an immediate understanding of how we'd fix that. So we're gonna have to give that some thought today. As well, I want to take a look at, I think, this one. Right now, the shove animation is not using this animation. It's just leaving the character as static. So if we walk over here and equip a couple of abilities, I also want to zoom this in again, always trying to keep that in mind. If we equip a couple of these and then go on a run, we will see that shove is just sliding. This is the other thing though, it's worth noting that it's taking a really long time to just get to the point where I can show this. And when I'm testing, I'm going to run into the same problem. I think part of today might also be a little bit of a feature, but some sort of configuration to be like, hey, this is what I want my default abilities to be, and this is what the default set of states for flags I want so that we don't get certain cutscenes playing. I think that's going to be really important, but we'll see. So yeah, when we shove, that shove effect is just a slide. And I'd like to have it so that's actually using the animation that Drixie has made for us. In terms of animations, the other big one that I'd like to take a look at is these ones here. When we're running, we're getting a kind of pop back to idle for a frame that looks really bad. And also when we walk into rooms, we're sliding instead of walking into the rooms. So we can take a quick look at that as well. So when we walk off, we see the character run and fade out. But here we fade in. Oh, and we did run in that position. Do we run in this position? Oh, so it's not consistent. Interesting. Why am I not seeing that behavior? Okay, that's going to make that a little trickier to fix, because there's definitely a situation in which we've been seeing the animation slide in instead of do the run. Okay, but it does not seem to be happening right now. It's definitely not fixed though. I did not do anything to resolve that off camera. Okay, so that's all kind of the general coverage. Let's dive into it. Let's grab these two. We're gonna pull this down and this one down. I think probably the easier low-hanging fruit is adding the shove animation. We should already be importing that. And we should have a shove on the character. Let's find the character in the scene, which should be over here. And then from here, we should be able to click on that character's controller And we should be able to see all the animation states associated with it. And we do have a shove animation. Okay, so that being the case, I should be able to just modify shove to use that animation. Let's take a look at light attack and see how it's doing it. This is applying the hit animation to the enemy. Where do we actually apply the attack animation? Here, animation parameter ability effect, which has the parameter melee 1 as a trigger. And it is a bool parameter, apparently. I don't know if that matters. I think it might. I think triggers need to have this bool parameter ticked, otherwise they don't work. Which is something I'd also like to fix, but not required right this second. Okay, so I think we need this step. What's under here? This has a wait on animation event and then set speed 0. Right, so we kind of have like a pause frame where we pause on a certain frame and then let the animation flash and do some other stuff before we set the animation speed back to 1, essentially unpausing it and resuming it. Let's take a quick look inside of the animation. So we'll take a look at hero animation formatted, and we'll come over here to shove. If I had to guess, I don't think it's going to have anything here. This is actually frame 210. So if we go back to Unity, we can take a look at the JSON file we export from Aseprite and see whether or not we have a pause frame anywhere in that range. I can't quite figure out an easier way to tell where the properties are on animations other than just looking at the JSON file. So drag this down. So we have some around 160 and 168, but we do not have any pause frames on the shove. Okay, we might want to add them, but for now, let's just trigger the shove and see how it looks. So we're going to grab this component here, and we're going to go back to shove effect, I think. And around where we play the particle... Ooh, it might actually be here way sooner. Let's disable these wait for pause and the animation speed for now. And let's change this to the parameter shove, which I think should trigger the animation on the attacker, so our character. And that should be all we need to do to have the animation play. We'll need to restart. And again, we're going to have to go pick up the abilities and walk through a couple of screens in order to actually get to the point where we can test this. I guess, you know what, I'm going to think about this for a second. One easy path to just testing faster could be to just embed the abilities back into the prefab directly. No, that's probably not going to work. That's how we used to have it, was all the attacks were embedded inside of the character. But because of the load system for equipping that we created a few streams back, if we were to just put the abilities in, I think there's a good chance they would just get overwritten with nothing, because there's nothing actually equipped in the back end. So we will need to write some sort of config file that will actually assign them to the character on load of the game. Okay, let's do the shove. Okay, so it played the animation, which is nice. Let's slow this down. So we're going to slow it down to a quarter speed. Yeah, so the animation is just way too slow for what we're doing. Let's take a look at the frame rate of some of this. So this is a 200 frame animation. That's 100. So for some reason we hold this one for a while. Let's try dropping that down to 50. Then we go into here. This is like stepping backwards. So I think here is where we should be charging forwards, is over these frames. Interesting. Very interesting. So I think we're going to have to do a little bit of magic to line these up. We know that the tween backwards is over 0.1 seconds. So I think that means 0.1 would be 100 milliseconds, I believe. So we need to go from here to here to this frame. So we need to go through these first 4 frames in 100 milliseconds. So let's leave this at 50. Let's try 25, 25, and 25. So this will be 125. So it'll overlap a little bit with the go forward, but I'm willing to give that a shot. And then we shouldn't have to re-export the file itself. We just need to re-export the JSON file. The images haven't changed. And then if we come into here, we'd need to re-import the anim sprites. I don't know if we can do this while the game is running. Ooh, okay. Right, we're running at half speed. So if we slow it down again, quarter speed, or sorry, not half, quarter. That felt better. And we can update the animations while running, which is pretty cool. Did not realize we could do that. Let's skip a turn so that the enemy will come to us. Okay, let's see this again in slow motion. Let's, you know what, let's even go slower. Let's go, I don't know, whatever one quarter is. So that frame is just way too slow. Whatever frame the 13th is, what is that one at? That one's also at 100. So let's just try, for the sake of quickness, what if all of these are only 25 milliseconds? Yeah, let's give that a shot. So what is this now? This one we can see in the bottom, if I hover over here, in the bottom left, we can see what the frame milliseconds is. So this one's 50, 25, 25, 25, 25, 25, 25, 25, easy. Okay, so we have a little bit of an anticipation frame on the first one, and then everything else is pretty much consistent. So we'll do the same thing here, and we'll assign all of these to 25 as well. Save that, and we'll re-export just the JSON file. Come back in, re-import our animation sprites, bring up back to normal speed. That's an interesting point, actually. I just noticed when we flinched facing this way. I feel like we should change the facing when we get hit to whoever hit us. That would probably be pretty handy. Huh. Let's add that to the list. Let's bring back up snipping tool. We're just going to take a little screenshot of this. Bring that over. Just trying to get snipping tool on the other monitor. Okay, and then let's bring back up PureRef. I think this should be something we could do today as well, but I don't want to tackle it right this second. Control N for a note. Change facing to look towards attacker. I think that could have some weird complications. That the player may not want, but I think it's worth exploring. All right. So then we're gonna shove. That was very fast. Let's slow that down again, and let's see what that looks like in slow motion. That's not bad. Let's bring it back up to normal speed. Shove again. It feels a little quick. I think the animation is matching the movement, which is good. But it just feels a little too fast. Okay. Let's give that another shot. Yeah, it's too hard to read at that speed what's happening. But it's matching the movement, which is great. Let's go quarter speed. Yeah, so we step back and then we slide in. Okay. So this happens very quickly here. Huh. It's one of these weird things. I feel like when we don't have animation or good animations, you want things to happen really quickly because there's no visual like feedback that makes it interesting. But once you get like pretty good animations and particle effects and stuff in, I feel like there's like this natural slowdown you need to do where this looked good as a shove effect when the character was just sliding. But now that we have the animation actually in, I feel like everything could almost be doubled and it wouldn't feel like, oh, this is clunky. It's like the brain's just like, oh, it's playing the animation and it's okay. Let's give it a shot. So let's double this time to 0.2, so it takes a little longer to slide back. And then we'll times this by 2, and that'll be 1.5 seconds. And then we'll still very quickly, at some point here, there's another offset position. Yeah, offset position reset. This one happens still very fast, and that's okay, because we're going to be resetting back to the idle as we slide backwards, and that's fine. So if we double everything there, we should be able to just double everything here as well, and it should still match. So we'll go 100 on this first one, and then we'll bring everything back up to 50. Or actually, I think they were higher than 50 to begin with, but still, we're gonna bring them in line. Frame properties 50. Okay, we'll save that. We'll re-export just the JSON, import the animation again, and see if that's feeling a little bit better. And then we got to go through re-equipping all the abilities and everything. I think I see a couple of lurkers in chat today. Let me know if there are any audio issues, as we were getting some weird popping noises right at the very end of yesterday's stream, but we did stream for like 6 or 7 hours, so it's very possible that it was related to just like the internet more than anything else. So the speed up I have set up works, and the game does not break really because of the speed up. The game keeps breaking because I'm moving so fast that I'm using all of my pooled sound effects, and then the game breaks because we're trying to allocate an object and we don't have it. I think instead of doing that, we should have essentially a null check here. Well, that's a null check. If the sound effect object equals null, we should just return rather than crash the game. Because we're debugging, I'd like this to function. And then there's been a couple of different spots where we've seen this exact same break on different audio effects. There's also maybe a case to be made that we should just increase the number of sound effects in our pool, but yeah, so that broke, but we didn't break. Now, will that error cause any true damage? No, because these are our error logs that we're debug logging that error, so it shouldn't affect Unity. Okay, so let's slow things down again. So let's go half or quarter speed. Okay, that looked about the same as what we had before, but obviously a bit slower. Let's try this at normal speed. So we're now at normal, ordinary movement. Still a little hard to read. Maybe that's okay, though. We step back. That of feels like it's lining up with the movement. The animation feels like it's fitting to me. Huh. Honestly, it's fitting better than I thought it would. Interesting. I think we leave that for now. I wanna play with that, see how that feels. I think these values could be adjusted ever so slightly. Like maybe this could be a little bit longer. This is a 0.2. Maybe this needs to be a 0.2 as well. Maybe we could have more of an impact frame. Like, it's possible we should try doing a pause on this frame. The same way we do a pause on the punch for, like, anticipation. You know what? Let's give that a shot. Let's add a pause effect. And we'll add one here on the same frame facing the other way. So these should both have pauses. Yep. And yep, we'll save that. We'll export the JSON file again. And then we'll re-import. And I haven't really talked about this too much, but we'll get into it a little bit later when we start trying to fix the popping during the walk. But what this is doing is essentially that JSON file gets read in through this command, and I regenerate every single animation in the project based off of the sprites, essentially. And depending on different values like pauses, inside of the metadata of that cell, I add events, and then I have like an event system that I can listen for that animation reaching that frame, essentially. So in here, we're going to now look at this thing where we say wait on animation. We want to wait on animation not directly under here, but I think we want to wait on animation I think here. So we will not reset the position offset, but I think we should do the particle. We should do the particle effect spawn, then we should wait and pause until we get the pause event heard, and we should set the animation speed to 0. Why were these under here? Does this have any conditional properties? It doesn't. So there's no reason these had to be embedded underneath of this. The only reason that you have to do any kind of childing in my ability system is if it's a branch ability effect, or if it has some sort of conditional property, then everything under that parent will respect the same conditional property. It's like an if check, essentially. But because that didn't have anything, I guess these can be here. I suppose I could set this... No, it's fine. It's more readable this way for me personally. And then we're going to need to set the animation speed on the attacker back to 1 at some point. We normally do that down here somewhere in the normal attacks. Let's put it at the very bottom to begin with. And then we will readjust later. And this is resetting the attack speed to 1, which should have it... I think this just needs to be... Well, this is tricky. So we want to pause the character animation on impact. So at this frame or this frame, we want to show the character hitting the enemy. And we want to hold on that frame This one's trickier than the attack because the punch moment is when we hit the pause is when we want to do all the extra effects. So let's take a look. If we take a look here and take a look at a hit effect, for example, this thing has a play the animation for melee and then wait for the pause event. And then when we hit the pause event, we're going to hold here and we're not going to go past this point. We're going to stay on this step until the animation has reached pause. And once we do, we're going to set the animation speed to 0. So we're going to hold on that frame. And then we're going to do like a flash of the sprite, play some particle effects. Like all of this is happening on the frame that we want the punch to feel like it's hitting, essentially. We can do all this wind up or whatever we want, but the moment that we hit that pause frame, everything else continues and we do all of the reactions, essentially. What's a little weird about the shove is technically there's like these other things like the offset positions that are really actually the moment of impact. Let's also rename this to shove. Not necessary aesthetic, but we want to make this readable. I almost feel like at some point I'd like to have like an auto rename built in some of these ability effects, but that's fine. It's not entirely necessary and it would take me a day or so of work, which to save like maybe 5 seconds of renaming. I feel like for this one, we might actually want this to be under a branch effect. So we might want to, after we play the animation for shove, we might want to branch so that this stuff underneath of the branch happens independent. Does this consume the event when it happens? If we make a wait on animation event sequence step, it does not. Interesting. Things get a little messy here. So we could have this happen independently, and then we can wait on the pause and then pause the animation. And then we can let the rest of the animation for moving the character still play independent of that wait. And we could say, hey, by the time we reach the punch world, realistically, the offset should also be reached. Oh, that's a better way to do this. Actually, let's try this. Let's say once we say we hit the offset here and we've impacted to the character, I think we should then pause here, because this should, if I've timed things well, line up to be about the same moment. And then we will set the animation speed to 0. No, that still doesn't feel right. It's like, the problem is our animation system is, and I don't think this is coming across well on stream. I'm sorry for anyone who can't follow, looking at a bunch of random words in a tree structure, but I'm trying to visualize the animation in my head. So I'm like thinking out all of this moment, and like I'm trying to think about this like impact moment, and I really want the motion to line up, but the motion isn't in the animation itself. The motion of the character is built into these offset position values, and we're essentially trying to get the offset position values in sync with the animation itself. Realistically, what would be really nice is if it knew how long that section of animation was, and it played the offset at the same duration of whatever that animation is, instead of me having to like hard build them to match. None of this is blocking. And this is branch, so none of the exposure stuff is blocking either. This is really tricky, actually. Okay, here's what we're going to try. We're going to just see it in action. Rather than try and process it all mentally and hold it all in my head, we're going to just do some stuff. So I'm going to attempt to say that we're going to add a new delay in here for 0.2 seconds. After we sense that we are at the pause, so we're going to do all this animation, and hopefully these two events line up pretty perfectly. We're going to set the animation speed to 0. So we're going to hold on that final frame. And then after we have reached the pause and we hold, then we're going to cause the whole world to shake, which is what Punch World is. And then we're going to do this kind of exposure flash. And then we're going to, which is like the world getting dark and then really bright. So it's kind of really impacting and feeling like a good hit. Then we're going to delay for 0.2 seconds before setting the animation back to 1, at which point we're going to reset the animation and slide back. And then we already have a 0.2 delay in here before we start doing any of the actual like numbers flying off and moving the enemy, essentially. Let's give that a shot and see how that looks. The big thing here is we're adding a bit of an extra amount of... extra delay to the effect that it didn't have before. Demi Plume, first time chatter in Twitch, says, hey, I just joined. I saw a little video about the Unity grid system you've got. It's super interesting. Are you talking about just the way that everything like slides up as we move? We should zoom in again. Oh, hard broke. Hard broke. Did we not re-import the animations? Unlockable characters with the hydration redeem. Appreciate it. Mixing of 3D and 2D and the way you load tiles on site. Yeah, it's definitely something that I feel like we found the magic. I go over like the history on like a video. I think it's the channel video on YouTube, like the main one on the front of the page when you enter into my channel page. But I did a video like a few weeks ago where I went over the history, and I feel like, oh, it's still broken. I feel like the moment when we realized, like, okay, we don't want to just load in flat rooms and have everything appear, but take this idea that like each tile can reveal, was like a really big moment of like, aha, here's something that's actually different and fun. And it's been the thing that almost everyone has commented on when they pop in. They're like, this seems different and interesting. I feel like someone must have done it before. There it is. I want to look at this file. I feel like some other game must have done it before, but I am struggling to think of someone else who has it look exactly like this. It's really taking a lot of the ideas of like old school dungeon crawlers where you're forward facing and moving through the tiles. Again, Etrian Odyssey I've mentioned before was a big inspiration, but taking that into a tactics game, which I don't know, I think it works really well. Otherwise, I wouldn't be continuing to build it, I guess. But so on frame 214 and 222, we are saying that there should be a pause, which is 15 here and 223 because of off by 1, count at 0 versus count at 1 issues. So I think we should be hitting that pause. So why is the character getting stuck in this frozen state here indefinitely? I've clearly done something wrong. What did I do? So we should be getting to here and waiting for the pause event. But it's never hearing the pause. We play the animation. Oh, we're too slow. The animation is already finished playing by the time we get to the wait sequence step, because we have to do all of this stuff first. Okay, so this does need to be under a branch. Otherwise, it just won't work. Okay. Yeah, see, that's the type of stuff that, like, I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure it all out in my head, but, like, that's something that I was struggling to visualize. Demi Plume says, yeah, the tile loading is unique. Bastion has that effect. Very little use it. I think Bastion was, like, obviously a very clear inspiration as well, but even Bastion doesn't necessarily do a lot with the tile loading. It's more of an aesthetic choice, not like a mechanical thing that actually affects, like, gameplay in any way. I think the thing that I'm most excited to continue to experiment with is, let's slow this down. That looks better. Yeah, so let me finish that thought, though. The thing I'm most excited about is the idea that every time you do a run, the world stays revealed. So all the enemies that you revealed in that space remain revealed for every sequential run after that. So when we come back into this room, everything is still here. And when we come back into this room, all the enemies are loaded. And I think there's kind of this weird emergent behavior that happens where it's like the first time you're playing, there's a lot of enemies just appearing right in front of you. So melee is going to be really strong. But then when you come back through, any kind of ranged abilities are going to feel better, but will feel worse if you're exploring. And this idea that depending on whether or not you're revisiting an area and looking for things, or I won't get too deep into it, but I have mechanics and ideas with some inspirations from Majora's Mask to, like, try and make you want to revisit spaces, and, like, that revisiting versus trying to get further into the world, I think is going to be an interesting, like, dynamic. Okay, so if we do this now, so there's a noticeable pause. So this is working as intended. When we slide forward into the enemy, we hold on that frame for a couple of seconds, and then we pop back very quickly after. Let's go slow again. I want to see it in, what is, I guess, 1/8 speed. So let's see it in 1/8 speed. So we slide back. That's fine. We're stepping. There's a lot of sliding here, but that's okay. It's happening very quickly. I think that's looking okay. This is where polish gets to be like this weird system of, like, how far do you want to go down? Like, how perfect do you want this to look? And I'm a real stickler for details. And so the initial thing, let's go up to quarter speed again and skip our turn. That's normal. Okay, quarter speed. So, actually, let's let him do his thing. Okay. I feel like here that's sliding, but okay. There, is okay, but I feel like we're holding for that frame just a second too long. I think I want this delay to be a little bit less so that we don't hold quite as intensely. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. And then we have to reload. I am feeling this like constant reset up problem though. The speed up system helps, but overall, oh my goodness. Okay, so we can't go like 16 times speed because it's just too fast. Can't control anything. I think even though I want to work on bugs and polish, I think we need to take a small moment to work on some sort of like config system. Okay, quarter speed. Oh, we haven't actually tried facing the other way. Does that still look as good? Okay, let's focus on one thing at a time. Let's try from this direction. Quarter speed. Interesting. Can I even see a difference between the previous version and this version? Sliding back. Yeah. So this delay is not just delaying the animation reset, it's also delaying the reset of position. And delaying the particle flying off currently. So I think the very minor difference here is I think I want the particle to happen immediately, and I think I want the slide back to actually happen immediately too. And I think partway through the slide back we want to have the animation turn back on. Very minute changes. These are super insignificant, and you do kind of need to be playing the game at like a reduced speed to even see the kind of changes I'm making here. But like, I don't know, it's the little things that like my eye catches that I just want to fix. Okay. Let's go quarter speed. That feels better to me. One-eighth speed. That might have been too slow. Yeah, that feels better. I can't fully explain why, it just does. Let's do it at full speed. Yeah, that feels more like we're impacting and then reshifting back. And I can read a little bit better what's happening. Yeah, I'm shoving the enemy. Okay. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to call that good. How do we... I'm going to just grab this thing. Ooh, I had grouped this with another problem, which is that shove executes with no target. While we're in the shove effect, let's see if we can figure out why that's happening. So when we have an ability needs to have a valid target in order for it to execute. Otherwise, it won't do anything. So if we come in here and just start a run, And if I hit shove, it takes a turn. We can see that my action points are expending and that the timer in the left is being used. So even though I don't have a valid target, I am shoving. So what about this shove effect is saying, hey, I think this is valid. This is where my engine gets to be a bit of a problem. Or my tools, my systems, whatever you want to try and classify it as. But the abilities that I've created really work on this idea of like bite-sized parts. And that's great because it means that everything's super flexible and I can just modify and change things. But when it comes to actually figuring out, hey, why is something happening? It means that there's so many little moving pieces, it becomes very difficult to determine where the culprit is without having a full mental map in your head of every single possible step. Okay, so inside of here, we have a set valid function. So let's look for all instances of this. That's probably going to be our best way forward. So if we have damage, we will get that as set valid. And also, we've abstracted everything down to interfaces, so I don't even know which set valid function we care about in this situation. I'm going to guess it's probably this one. This one doesn't do anything, and this one doesn't do anything. So ability direction target is the only one that actually even uses the valid effect. Tiles and unit targets, I think we're not even really using. The system has slowly evolved such that every ability is essentially an ability direction target. And that's how we can like just push a direction and hit something, because most of our abilities are based off the player's facings. There's very few of our abilities now that actually are tile based or unit based. Everything's positional and facing based. Okay, so debugger breakpoint set. Let's attach the debugger and let's see if we can tell who's setting valid. Hit the button. Nothing happened. Oh, was the debugger not fully connected yet? Unity wasn't ready. Unity's thinking. It's doing its thing. Okay. Well, it broke. Cool. Let's try that again. So we are still connected. Speed the game up. Okay, yeah, that's fair. So we'll have to put the breakpoint in because every step is also valid, because every movement is an ability. So we're going to have to wait till we get to here. We have shove available. Now we'll put the breakpoint back in. Now, why are you valid? Who says you're valid? The push ability effect says you're valid. If we found a tile. This seems like a bug. If we have a push target, if we have a push target and we get a tile, we're saying we're valid. And we're displaying... This tile display system isn't something we really look at much anymore. Because essentially we have a predict system in place. In here, we have like a target selection screen, which is like, hey, lets you choose which target you want to target. which enemy you might want to hit. So like if you think about something like Final Fantasy Tactics, oftentimes you have a whole grid of squares and you're choosing a specific grid within your range to actually hit the enemy with. We have that system, but because I want the game to feel fast-paced and kind of combo-oriented, I actually ignore like most of my targeting system I've built in, and instead every time you push a button, I essentially auto-complete this screen. When we open it, somewhere in here, I try to like just auto close the screen if there's a valid target. I don't know where that is right now, but there's some hard-coded hacky code in here that just says if you found a valid target, just move on. Is it part of the... Oh, this is because this is the JRPG version of this file. Combat, select, target screen, infinite retries. Yeah, so on update, if there is a valid target, we're going to just try and submit the button. So we're essentially pressing the A button for you every single frame. And so the screen gets skipped most of the time. But the ability system is set up in a way that when you predict, so if you try and target something, it will show the movement or the like status icons of what would happen if you were to perform that ability. Because it was built without this being here. We just don't really show you that. And you might see it for like a frame where you see a flash of like a blue selected tile, and that's like the one frame where this screen was open. So like this predict feels like we could just remove it because we don't do that anymore. But at some point I might want to remove this check, and I would still like it if all of my ability effects still display their information correctly. So the question becomes, why was it necessary for the push ability effect to have to say that it's a valid target on its predict? I would guess it's likely something to do with that target selection system. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn back on the normal functionality for this bug, because I think I'd like to validate that things still work. So we're going to disable the auto A pressing on target select so that we don't skip that screen. And we're going to try and figure out what the shove effect is trying to do and why it needed that valid select. And then we're going to try and figure out how we can rebuild it in a way that doesn't cause it to be valid when it shouldn't be. But we just need more information. We're going to get rid of this because we now know where the problem is. And in fact, we're also going to pin the push ability effect up here so that we don't lose track of it. Technically don't need anything but shove, but we're going to equip all of them. Okay. So yeah, we can see here that if I turn off the auto select, this is what it's trying to do on predict. And if I hit A, it's saying it's valid. So really, we need to make sure that this still works and it works exactly like this. But if I was to try and hit A here, it doesn't actually do anything. So let's look at the select screen and let's figure out what's happening on A press. This is just checking if there was a valid target. And if it's valid, we're going to move on and close. Different question. Does anything else other than this screen care about valid? The effect-driven ability area cares about valid in some regard. To do hack needed to do to result hack needs to be resolved properly at some point, but for now we want to make sure that we clear the target data after predicting before handing it to the ability for perform. But we want to make sure predict set's valid. Maybe this should be a separate call to check all effects for valid, but predict is already doing this work. Feels silly to do it twice. Interesting. I see what's going on. So when we try and do a prediction on an ability, we go through all of those predictions and we try and determine if this is a valid target. And then we store that prediction of whether it was valid, and then we recreate the ability target data. So we build a new ability direction target with this unit's direction and the current tile that unit's on, and we set it back to valid immediately after, because we already know that from the prediction it was valid. We predicted it was valid or invalid. I guess it could be either way, but the predict already ran through every single ability effect to determine whether or not this would work. So there's no reason to do it again. Instead, we just say, yeah, it's good. We predicted it's good, so it's good. So what happens if we remove this set valid from here? I'm going to assume that nothing else sets valid inside of the push effect. I would think that the damage would do it. Okay. Here's the thinking, I think. I think I got it. The problem set here is that I believe when I wrote this, it's been a couple of months, but I believe I set this to valid with the expectation that we may one day have non-enemies be pushable. So we may eventually want to have like rocks or other types of what will effectively be enemy units, but they won't be damageable. But we might still want to have them be pushable. And so again, future planning, I set this to valid if there is a tile. But I think that's the wrong approach. I think this should be valid if it has a defender. Now, what is this doing? Tile display damage, preview damage. So if it found a tile, we will do on the tile display the damage. If it didn't find a tile, it will do the preview tile display damage. Is preview tile a part of base ability effect? No? What? This was commented out, obviously, but what was preview tile? So we can set a preview tile. It's a object inside of certain abilities. Targets? Certain ability targets can set a preview tile. So here, custom damage shows us a still working example where we get a preview tile. If it's not null, or if it is equal to null, then we get the defender and get that defender's tile and then show the display damage. Otherwise, if we have a preview tile, we're going to display the damage there. Okay, so I seem to have some sort of system in place for having the tile be different from the unit that's selected. And it's only currently still being used inside of the damaging effects. Is that true in this one as well? Yes, except for this one isn't displaying anything because prototype damage has been removed. Okay. What about an inflict? When we inflict a status effect, that still uses preview tile versus regular tile. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, so if there isn't a valid unit on that tile, we still want to preview on the tile that would be getting hit what the status effect would be. So if we were using this ability, we want to show the player, hey, this specific tile, when you would perform this ability, would do a stun effect. And so if there is not a unit there, we will show on the tile the stun icon. If there is a unit there, we want to display on that unit's tile the stun. Now, wouldn't those be the same thing? Yes, but they're slightly different in how we have to handle the logic for them. Because if there's a unit on that tile, we don't want to show it on the base of the tile. We actually want to display it above that unit's head. And there's a little bit of magic that happens between these two, I think. I believe that is why these are different. This looks to be that the push effect used to deal damage and no longer does. So I don't think we actually care about the preview anymore. Oh, this is tricky. Again, we started this section off with the discussion that because my system is super flexible, it's powerful, but it also means that it's very complicated with a lot of like interconnected parts, and it's hard to visualize all of it. Let's change up the background music. And we've got a hydrate from unlockable characters. We're going to try commenting out the set valid. I think it needs to be there, but I just want to see what impact it has on the preview. And then once I better understand what impact it has on the preview, then we can make a call about whether or not it should be if there's a valid tile we preview, or whether or not there's a valid unit we preview. I believe what we should do is if there's a valid tile, we should show the display information, but we should have an internal check to make sure that there's actually a defending unit on that tile that we can target. Okay. So set valid does not affect the preview at all. Okay. So I think what it is we should have this logic always happen every time. And then if defender, aka there is a unit on that tile, does not equal null, then this is also a valid push. And we want this to be here in case we ever have a push that isn't damaging. We'd still like to have this work. And I don't think we need the preview damage stuff anymore because we've moved a lot of that out of like the push ability effect, and now it's just part of its own damage. It doesn't need to be in here. Okay, and then we can come back into the target select and we can turn back on our hack that auto presses the A button on the screen every frame. And the reason we still have this screen is that if I ever push a button and I don't have a valid enemy, I still like the idea that we see a little preview. And if I ever push the D-pad in the direction that my character needs to face, it will auto perform that attack. It feels a bit clunky. Again, it's hard to like get some of these ideas across on camera on streams when I'm the one controlling things, and you know, chat, you don't get to really feel the control, but the input system is still a bit clunky feeling. But I still like the direction of this, because like being able to see, oh, that's what would happen if I did this attack, or oh, I'm gonna move and then I'm gonna try and hit that blue tile. Oh, that's a weird bug. Oh. I think there's something like still a UI pass here where like this blue tile probably should be like a red tile. Also, these things used to show damage numbers on them, which helped a little bit with reading them as attacks. But since we've moved away from like set damage numbers to damage ranges, we're not displaying the damage number anymore when we do these, which does make the preview a little bit less clear. I think what we probably should do is we should change it so that there's like a swords crossed on the blue tiles. Probably change it to be a red tile and then put like a sword cross effect on it. Like that way it's like somewhat clear, oh, we're gonna fight or we're going to attack here. We don't need to be debugging anymore. Okay, so if we come back over here and we hit this, yeah, it does not use it. It looks like it does, but it is actually not. If we go here, oh, weird. That might be still a bug. That's rush. Okay. That's push. Okay, that's fine. If I do push and I'm facing this way, and as soon as I push towards the enemy, I do a rush attack. That's interesting. So that's a bit of a bug. I think what's happening there is when we face towards the enemy, actually, that's really weird. So I think it's doing a movement. So we're previewing the shove from our facing, but if there happens to be an enemy facing that way, it doesn't perform the shove, but instead it closes the shove and reads the input instead of as a facing thing, but as a direction. Oh, we can actually see it better here. If I'm facing towards this enemy already and I hit shove, it's using the action even though it's invalid. Okay. So we can set that up here, and let's actually go back and debug, because that means something is still setting this to valid when it shouldn't be. Is it because we have this get unit actually still being correct? I wouldn't expect we would have found a unit, but maybe we are. We are attached. We did not get a breakpoint. Why are we not hitting breakpoints here? the very least, we should get one in here. Let's try that. Okay, yeah, we hit this one. The damage is saying it's valid. Oh, okay. We are continuing to see this pattern, where for some reason, when I originally wrote this, it's either a bug or I did it for something I'm not remembering. We are setting things to valid as long as we have a tile. And I really feel like this should instead be checking I was going to say checking to see if we have a valid defender, but it is saying we have a valid defender. But the defender is us? Get unit from target. We are finding ourself when we do target get unit. What? The current targeted unit, which by default is null, but at some point we set the current valid unit to ourself. Okay. That's a bug. But that's like a core issue with our ability system bug. That's neat. The fact this class is called Hack makes me wonder if maybe that's related. Okay, so we need to reset things back up into the same position. The problem is every time we move, we're performing an ability as well. Let's come into here. Let's not delete, but disable all breakpoints. Then let's move up to here. Walk back. Okay. Now let's enable all breakpoints. And then let's hit the button and see what happens. So we do set the unit, and the unit we're setting is null here, and this is on find unit by tile offset. So this is an ability effect that is essentially trying to find a unit in front of us based off our facing. And this is correctly finding that we do not have great. Thanks, Tolhi. Really appreciate you. This is a different bug, but all right. So if we set the property of this, apparently it breaks things, and I don't know why. Okay, cool. Very helpful. Okay. Everything's crumbling down around me. All right. Here we get a unit. The current target unit is null, which makes sense. Here we're getting a target unit null, which is not correct. That is correct. Wait. Get unit from target. Distance property is -1. And so we're trying to get a position -1 position away. Huh. I see the bug. Okay, so this get distance system was in place for a charge ability. So I had an ability that would actually try and move the character forward one, and it would increment the distance property because you've stepped forward once. And it would keep doing that, and every time it modified the distance, it would keep checking after each increment of the distance to see if the next tile in front was an enemy. And if it was, it would say, cool, stop trying to move and instead hit the enemy. And so what this is doing, this logic, is trying to check whether or not we find an enemy at the distance value that we currently have set. But because distance starts at -1, it's saying, okay, let's check forward our position with a distance +1 beyond where we are. And because distance is negative, this becomes 0, and we end up checking a position of ourselves because this becomes a point of 0, 0. So we're adding 0, 0 to our own position, thus just being left with our own player's position. And we find that tile, and lo and behold, hey, there is a unit on that tile. It's us. Okay, so this system needs to work in order for charge-based abilities, which I may come back to function. And this is setting that distance value to -1, which I think is still correct. But the part I'm missing here is that I think if we have a -1 for our distance, we probably should ignore this logic. Yeah, it looks like it's only used as part of base effect. It makes sense because a bunch of things generically need to get what our valid attack target is. And the charge system is not saying, hey, this specific tile is where we're going to be targeting. It's saying, hey, our targeting is going to be based off of how far forward we charged. But I think if distance is less than 0, or even less than 1, really, then this shouldn't work. There's a high probability that I come back to charge effects and I'm like, why is this charge not working? And it might be because this fix breaks them. But I can't see a world in which our distance being 0, aka we didn't move at all. No, actually, because we +1 over here for some silly reason. Okay, so this needs to be less than 0. So if our distance is less than 0, that means we didn't have... No, that still doesn't... I feel like this has to be... I feel like our distance has to be at least 1, but I guess distance 0 is kind of like 1. So if we didn't move, but there is something in front of us, then we hit something with our charge. It's not a very good charge because we're literally just hitting something directly in front of us. But if we made 0 distance, then we're still potentially going to find a target in front of us. But if our distance is less than 0, then yeah, this shouldn't work. Okay, so I think this is the check that's missing. We need to... This function, which is a core part of our ability system, is needing to use the distance property for our charge effects to determine whether or not there is a flexible amount of range that we've gone, and whether or not there's an enemy in that flexible amount of range that we are going to use as our damage target. But if our distance is less than 0, aka the ability has set it to -1, and it never gets set to anything else, then that's not going to yield us a valid target, and so we shouldn't find anything. Okay. I don't know if that fully makes sense, but I think that's the problem. So let's come back into here, let's relaunch, let's reset up, and I believe now we shouldn't find anything valid. That's so crazy that we were finding ourselves because of not necessarily a hack, but like a very specific thing for charge. Equip, equip, equip. Zoom in. I think that might be why we were also seeing some weird effects when we faced trees. Yeah, because we were seeing like a foot icon or a blue icon under our feet. Wow, I think this might have been an underlying bug for a while. So if we walk up here towards this enemy and then we hit the button, we're still saying it's valid. Why are we still saying it's valid? Why is shove valid? Okay. Okay, we have set here. We hit the button. We're setting a unit to null inside of find unit by offset. So we're checking to see if there's a unit in front of us. And we're not finding one. Okay, that makes sense. Here, our unit is null, so that's great. Our distance is -1. So we skip this, right? Oh, I'm super dumb. I'm super duper dumb. I wrote the logic backwards. Okay. Okay. We're just not going to talk about it. We're just going to move on. Okay. Moment of truth. I'll take it. Chat, I'll take it. It's progress. All right, what are we complaining about? Inside of the predict for damage, we found that we did not have a preview tile. So we're trying to get the defender unit, but there isn't a defender unit. Interesting. And this normally is not a problem. This is normally not a problem because when we're doing the action without a unit facing in front of us, we're going to use the preview tiles. But because the preview tile is null, meaning we found something, I guess? We expect there to be a defender there, but in this situation there isn't. Okay, so the thing we need to figure out then is inside of the ability direction target, when do we set this preview tile, and how is it different when there isn't an enemy versus when there is an enemy? I do really like my ability system. I'm gonna say that aloud to myself mostly. I do really like my ability system because it allows me to very quickly and easily build new abilities. Even just what we saw with the shove. We added a new animation, we added a couple of weight effects, we added some delays, and I was able to fine-tune the shove to something that I'm at least, 80% happy with for the time being. And that was a very quick and painless thing to do with just a couple of extra game objects added to the prefab. Okay, so there's a bunch of logic happening. Let's disable all the breakpoints for now, and we will re-enable them when we do the thing. So I do like the ability system. I think it's quite powerful. But when it is acting up, and when I haven't fully thought things through properly, it does yield a lot of bugs. And these are bugs that are not too difficult to solve, but they do require a little bit of this, digging around to try and figure out what the heck is happening. So let's re-enable the breakpoints and let's hit shove. So we set unit to null because we don't find anything. We set a preview tile. Now, where is this happening? This is happening inside of set preview tile, inside of find unit by offset effect. So in here, we are saying that we did not find a target unit on a specific tile. We're saying, hey, this tile didn't have any content, which is AKA a unit. And so because of that, we're going to set this as a preview tile. So this is 1114 position. This is 1114 position. So if we found a unit, we would set that unit as the target. I have a feeling whatever we're about to find is going to be related to this bug. It's going to come full circle, but let's just keep moving forward on this line of thinking. So here, set preview tile is being set to 1114. If I hit this again, we set the preview tile to 1214, and this is as part of is valid destination tile effect. So this ability effect is checking to see whether or not the spot we would push the enemy to is valid, aka there's nothing there and we're not pushing it off the map. I think there's a separate effect. This one here is only checking to see if there's nothing in that space, like a tree or an enemy or something. Is valid destination tile. And so that's setting the preview tile to be the destination. And so it's a little bit weird because it's like, well, what, didn't we just set the preview tile to be 1114? But you kind of think about it a little bit like, oh, my trial on balsamic wireframes has expired. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Okay, well, apparently I did not bring over my licensed version at some point. All right, I will have to figure that out. Well, how am I supposed to explain things if I can't draw them with cubes? Paint. Oh my goodness. What madness is this? All right, fine. We will not use the super cool tool that I have paid for but did not set up the license properly for. We will instead draw it. So if we think about these things, there's two cubes, right? And then we have our character over here, which will be represented by the X. 1114 is this one. I might be getting this wrong, but let's just say I'm getting it right. And this is 1214. We start by setting the preview tile to this one. And then when we look a little further in the code, it's getting set to this one later. That's because once we have done all the logic we want here, there's a bunch of other things in between this first set and this second set. And this first one we set this, and then a bunch of other logic is happening that is using this. It's constantly referencing up to here and checking to see whether or not which tile we're going to apply the preview to. Any color changes, any icons, any numbers, any text. And then once we're done with all this logic and we say, okay, we're good, then that's when this second check happens. And then we go and do a bunch more logic after that that's now referencing this one. So this is actually fine, I think, as well. We're saying, hey, is this a valid destination tile? If the contents is null, yes, it's valid. And now this will be my next preview. If the tile contained content, then we set the preview to null because we're not previewing anything. We shouldn't show anything on this tile because it's not a valid tile to be pushed into. The push effect happens, which I don't think we care about right now. We're more concerned about other things. This all does its magic. That's fine. It's trying to get a valid unit. The distance is apparently set to 0. It's still finding null. Okay, so yeah, it's not finding anything. Set valid is being set here, and it's being set as part of the core system, and it was found to be false, and we will continue to make it false. Okay, so that all worked fine. So now, if we disable all those breakpoints, everything there worked as we would expect, and now we need to go look at why that does not operate the same way when there's a unit in front of us. So if this bat is here, and we re-enable these breakpoints, and then hit this button to shove, first off, this should do the same thing. And so far, yes. When we find a unit by offset, we are still not finding a unit directly in front of us, because if we look at this offset, I assume it's 1, 0 or 0, 1. So Y is our facing forward, essentially, index, because offset needs to be based off of your direction, not based off of actual coordinate systems. So 0 is essentially to the left X minus 1 is to the left, X1 is to the right of the characters facing, and Y is how far forward in the players facing we're going in the offset. And negative Y is hitting things behind us or checking for things behind us, essentially. So this is checking forward 1, and it's not finding a unit there, which is what we would expect. The bat is actually 2 in front of us, not 1 in front of us. Now we are setting a preview tile, and we are setting a preview tile to 615, and this is on, again, here as part of this system. So we're saying 615. So in our example here, we're now in a different world space on a different map, but essentially 615 should be the first one, and by that logic we would expect 715 to be where the enemy is, and we would expect there to be a bat on this tile. Okay, here we're setting a preview tile for whether or not it is a valid destination. And yeah, 715 is not a valid destination because there is content on there. So we set the preview tile to null. We come through here, we have a distance of -1, so we don't do anything, and unit is just going to return as null. Same thing here, I would assume. Unit is going to return as null. And we are missing a breakpoint in here. Okay, top of the round. That all looked fine though. So we would expect the preview tile to be null. Oh, I guess that's not fine. So in the first version... Okay, that is the difference. So when we found... Let's go back to Paint. In this situation, because there wasn't a unit on it, we found 1214 as our preview tile. But because we found a bat, we're saying, hey, that's not a preview tile. Because there was something... It was not a valid destination. But if that's the case, why do we not get the problem... Damage effect. Damage effect only conditionally happens if we hit something. Where do we hit something? If we hit. The shove effect name, which is a bit poorly named in this situation, it's because it's a prefab that we named it a bit odd, but it's actually doing the full hit, and it's checking to see on predict. We calculate the chance to hit the enemy. If it is a full hit type, it is always 100%. We'd actually kind of just ignore things. Is the problem... Let's disable all our breakpoints for a second. We're getting a deep dive into the ability system today. Okay, so if we hit this button here, that's getting previewed. Why do we not get to the damage? Because if this is a problem, let's go to damage effect. Damage ability effect. Let's enable these breakpoints. Let's hit this button. Yeah, so we're going to set a unit. We're setting a preview. We're setting the second preview. We're not finding a tile. Okay, here we get preview tile. Preview tile is set. So we ignore all of this logic. This should break then if we face a tree. Because a tree should not be a valid tile either. So if we push towards this tree, we should get preview tile set to 815, and then no target. We get 815, but we don't get a second preview set? We didn't hit is valid. This find tile by tile offset is checking 2 forward. And if it finds a tile on that target point, it checks to see whether that tile type is valid. What are tile types? Okay, walkable, not walkable, etc. So we don't actually check to see. So a tile that has a tree on it doesn't actually have content. It's not like it has a unit on it. It's a different system. It's basically non-walkable. So it gets treated differently. So we can't use a tree as a example. So in this situation, we set 914, then we set a second one is part of is valid, is setting it here. Okay. So if we come back down... If we come back down to here, walk up to this enemy, re-enable our breakpoints, hit the button, unit is set to null on the first one. As part of the find unit by offset, which is one tile forward, we do not find anything. So we set the preview tile. Okay. Now we should be doing a find tile by offset as well. So let's check this. This should be coming up next. Find tile by offset. Okay. We're checking forward. We're checking to see if there's a tile. This is a correct tile. We found one. We set that tile as the target. Okay. After that, what happens? After we find that tile, we should be going into is valid destination. And this should come back as a fail. Oh, we hit this one again. So there's two of these? Is valid tile. So there's somewhere else where we're also doing that. Okay. I will have to dig in that after we're finished debugging. But I would expect this to do the same. Yeah, it's setting that tile as a target. Okay. We get here again. Set tile, select tile 002. Oh, these first two, these select tiles are doing the same thing. Okay, so now we're selecting the one that has the unit on it. Okay, now we should be getting is valid tile destination. And we do. And we find that that tile has an enemy on it. So we set the preview tile to null. When there is no enemy on that second tile, it's fine. We just set it to a preview tile and we're going to just display some color on it effectively. If we find an enemy on that tile, we're going to set the preview tile to null because now there's a target. But that isn't a damageable target. It is in fact an invalid target. So at this point we should come down and do the push effect. But we shouldn't do... Wait, should we even do the push effect? I don't think we do the push effect. So essentially this ability system is like a bit of code, right? And I think what it is there's a bug in this logic. Somewhere in this if statement and these parameters, these are laid out incorrectly, is what I'm starting to get a vibe for. So what's happening is we're saying, hey, on that second tile forward, there's a unit. And that unit means that we shouldn't set this as a valid tile. We should say that there is no valid tile here for pushing something. And we should set the preview tile to null because there's now an enemy there. But then what happens is as we progress forward, setting that preview tile to null, we get to the damage effect. and we try and predict the damage effect. And because we don't have a preview tile, that means we must have something we're trying to damage. But the thing we're trying to damage we shouldn't do any of this. None of this should be executing. If we didn't find a target on the first tile, okay, I think I see what's happening. So if we're trying to preview things, we want to show both these tiles. And so we want to display and run through the entire ability effect. So normally there is logic in here that if we stop debugging, I think, or keep running through this is going to break, but that's fine. In fact, we're just going to turn that off. If we were to run through this, we would see that when we select the tile forward here, this is where we're trying to find a unit. So we're trying to find a unit on the tile that is in front of us by 1 in the Y. And that does found unit. And then with that found unit, we try and hit that unit. And somewhere in here, I would think we should have some logic that says if hit, if found unit. Okay, so yeah, so all of this logic underneath here should not execute if we didn't find a unit. However, we want to preview what would happen if we had found a unit. So some of these effects will often say they're true when we're previewing regardless. Yeah, this is the problem. So here we set the property found unit to 1 on preview if the tile is not null, aka off the board. So as long as the tile exists, we say that we found something. We say found unit is true. And we go down through all of this logic on preview. It used to be that I had a system in place that we would check to see if there was a unit on that tile. And if there was a unit on that tile, then we would say, hey, we actually found a unit. And here's the information about that unit. Otherwise, if that unit was not on that tile, we would say, hey, we didn't find one. So if we re-add back in this logic, which makes this logic no longer important. I think this was copied out when I did this commenting. Then this should properly make it so that we don't go down into here unless we found a unit. Now, I said that when I commented this out because it was causing another bug. So now we have to figure out what was the first bug that caused me to comment that out in the first place. Oh my goodness. But in theory, now, if we equip shove, which I should have done there, I couldn't see it, it was off screen, but yeah, we're good. If we equip shove and then walk up to here and hit this button, it does not autocomplete. It does not preview anything because there's no valid target. And it works fine. This one works okay. This one does not work okay. So we do not skip a turn at the very least, which is better. There's no errors, and we're not skipping turns. But the previews are completely busted if we add that code back in, which I'm guessing is what the bug was. And this bug makes sense, though, because what's happening is we're saying there's not a valid thing here, so we're not going to go into any of that logic. But I think... we might want to ignore conditional on predict is the answer here. And what this says is don't care about the conditional, still do all of your normal work, go in and execute, even if your conditional is false, but only on the predict stage. So I think if I tick that box, we might go back to the original problem. But at least we're not commenting out parts of code that should be operational. Oh. Super interesting. Okay, so behavior is really weird now, but what's happening is when we try and walk in directions that would be invalid shoves, it's causing the game to break. Oh, we have opened a can of worms today. That's not even how I would expect that to break. I would expect it to break as I step forward. Like, I would expect it to break on the next tile, not this one. Huh. Okay. There's a fundamental problem here. Are you reusing is valid tile between shove and walk and maybe not initializing between them? So we can take a look at contextual move. I would expect that it operates the same way. So what's happening is we're getting into contextual move, and contextual move has the same shove effect, which has the same... now has the same ignore conditional. I think the fundamental issue here is that, like, the way I've constructed the shove effect has a problem where it's not predicting properly. We're real deep in the weeds here, though. This was not... I expected that this would be a quick problem to solve. But it turns out we found a fundamental flaw in the... specifically not the ability system, but more in the way that I've constructed the shove ability effect. So, for some reason, turning on ignore condition on predict completely busts this. Now, this does operate differently. Does it? Why do we have these two files that look nearly identical? And one of them is labeled hack. Interesting. All right. Okay. Let's work through it. So hack looks to be the same logic as find unit by tile offset, but the hack one didn't have this commented out stuff. It was using the original form, it looks like. Probably because I needed it to work this way, where it actually respected the logic. So this means ignore conditional, say AK found unit, probably needs to not be true for contextual move, but does need to be true for the actual shove ability itself. Let's try that to start. We're a little bit trial and erroring here a bit, just to kind of get a better grasp of what's going on. Gotta move forward. Can't sit and think forever. Gotta get more data. Okay, so we're fine here, we're fine here, we're fine here, we can walk up here. Okay, so turning that off obviously fixes that. But let's see what happens if we walk up to an enemy now. So if we walk up to an enemy, oh, the slide in was there too. And we hit the shove, we get a break. What was the issue? We go back to the original issue. Okay, that's what I expected. So I think for contextual move, we care about setting this properly because we need to not enter into the shove effect and preview the shove effect on a contextual move unless it actually is valid. If we are previewing a shove effect from the ability, we want to preview what would happen if you had a valid target. But for contextual move, we don't want to preview that. We want to keep going and we want to see what the next potential contextual thing you could do is. So contextual move needs to not just ignore the conditions, but shove does, I'm pretty sure. So if we're in shove and we push this button, we should be previewing what should happen. So this, I think, is actually working correctly now. However, we still run into the problem where when there is an enemy who is in front of us and is 2 tiles away from us, in this situation, with shove, we will select a tile 2 in front. We will see if that is a valid tile effect. It will tell us that it is not, and will not set a preview tile. Then we will go in and try and do the push effect and display that information. That makes sense because we want to preview this, like, you know, little foot icon that we normally see here. So we want to come in here, we want to preview, we want to get into the shove effect, even though it's not a valid unit. We want to still go down through all of these effects, and we want to try and preview as much as we possibly can. And that includes like selecting the tile in front of us. We're also like selecting the tile, setting our facing, and then unselecting a tile as well. But here we're doing like the UI select. So this is the blue one. So this is like selecting that tile. And then down here, we want to do all this logic where we actually want to try and determine if there is a valid tile here. And if we found a tile, we're going to come in here. We're going to reset valid tile. We're going to come in here, we're going to set the push effect, which is going to make the little foot icon appear and turn this tile to green. I think there might be a more fundamental issue, but I'm going to say that damage effect should have an additional conditional property, which is that we found both a hit and that there was a found unit. Because we will get into here and say that the hit was valid when previewing, even though we didn't find a unit. So we're getting in here because we want to do all this other logic, but the damage effect wants to make sure that we actually found a unit. And if it did not find a unit, it should not try and apply its damage effect, and therefore should not do its damage hit. It should not check for defeated. It should not branch and do any of the granting of experience. And it should not do the miss. So this whole damage effect right now is happening at the very bottom. And it feels like it was just a little too open. With the assumption that if we got here with a hit, then we were good. But because of the preview nature, sometimes we can get here without found units, and thus it wouldn't be okay. I'm saying all this, and as I slow down, I realize, but wouldn't we still want to preview the damage effect? Interesting. Does where are all the spots we set valid again? On movement, which we're not doing here. On any of the damages, which makes sense. On a jump, which is a type of movement. And on the push effect. Here's the problem. The problem is the damage effect should be tied to performing a push effect. If we did not perform a push effect, we should not be performing a damage effect. But even in preview we're going to show the push. How does the push know what tile it's affecting? It's using get unit. So something is just setting the unit. So the push doesn't know which tile it's affecting. Damage should care about this preview tile. So damage should be happening way up here somewhere. The push effect is affecting the defender. But it seems to know that information from some other location. Like somehow push knows about the first tile, even though we've checked to see whether or not we're valid on the second tile. Isn't defender equal target.getUnit, setting defender as the target? Not quite. Target, this is getting the defender and checking if the defender is valid. So it's getting a variable of the defender and then checking to see if the defender is something, basically, if we found a defender. And if we found a defender, we're setting this to valid. But I guess my question is, where do we set the unit? Because it feels like at this stage, we're talking about... It feels like here we're trying to figure out who we're trying to attack. But then we go and check to see whether or not the next tile forward is valid for a push. And then once we've checked to see if this is valid, then we go back and try and do the push effect on the unit that's on the first tile. But then when we go to do the damage preview, we're still looking at the second tile because last thing we did was check whether or not it was okay to be pushed to that tile. I feel like we should be going back to previewing the first tile. I'm guessing based off this... Yeah, get tile changes each time. So we should go back a tile before damage effect kicks in. The question is what conditionals. Okay, I think I'm onto something The problem is that after we move forward and select the next tile to see if it's valid to do the push effect on, we don't go back a tile to preview the damage on the first tile. But before we go down that route, I want to see why this one doesn't care about the preview tile. And maybe it should. So I need to see where this get unit is being set. Who is actually setting this unit, which we have here. Okay. Okay. So let's enable everything. Let's disable everything. Let's get in position. Let's enable everything. Who sets this? So first we're at the very beginning. We're doing the very first find tile, which should come back with null, and it does. Then we set a preview of that tile so that we can do some like UI stuff to it. Then we are going into the find tile by offset. So this is checking 2 tiles forward, I believe. No, this is when we're setting our facing. Forward, backwards. Okay, now this is where we're setting, checking for the valid tile forward. And we find that that tile is valid because it's walkable. Okay, and we set the tile. We're predicting. We found that there's content on there, so it is not a valid destination. Not a valid destination. Okay. Base effect here, part of the combo system. We don't care about that. Did we not get to push? Did I skip over it? I guess we didn't get in there because it wasn't valid. It wasn't a valid tile, so we didn't even get to push. There's so many paths. Yeah, current unit is null. So in this scenario, we didn't even get to push effect. We didn't even preview it because it wasn't a valid tile. But even if it's not a valid tile, we might still deal damage. This still doesn't answer my question about how push effect... Oh, maybe it does, actually. If we take a look here, find unit by tile. Yeah. So push effect doesn't care what tile we're on. It doesn't care which tile is our current selected tile for previewing. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that at some point we found a unit, and then way later the push effect doesn't even care about any of the tile select stuff. It just says, hey, there was a unit that you said at some point I'm going to be targeting. I'm going to do some work on that. I'm gonna use that unit. And it doesn't care about what our current selected tile is. But damage does. Damage doesn't operate solely on a unit. Damage operates on a preview tile, potentially. And so because we set a preview tile as part of moving forward here to check the is valid destination, and that tile had something on it, it can't be a preview tile. And so the last thing we had set is in an invalid state. So I think it really is just this, where after we check for the forward tile, we just need to make sure that we go back. I can't do that here. I have to do that inside of the shove effect. But we just need to... Oh god, what did I do? Okay, perfect. I think we're okay now. Okay. I don't think this should have any differences. Okay, cool. So if we come back in here, we should be able to turn this on. We need to go back a level. We want to remove this component. We want to move this property. I think no matter what state we're in, we want to go back to the previous tile after we checked whether or not we're doing the push effect. It's possible we might want some conditional based off of whether or not we found a valid tile versus not found a valid tile. But I think we just missed this when we originally set this thing up. Okay. Yeah, let's say that's it. I don't know. The really all it is that we're... If we think about it in this paint version, the damage stuff is happening at the very end. But if we went, okay, let's set here to look at this preview, set here to look at this preview, and then before we do damage down here, we just need to reset back to the first tile again. That's the realization. We're gonna just debug, disable everything, and we're just gonna see if that fixes things. Okay. So I can walk to the trees. There's no problems there. I can hit... Oh, did we see errors? Object set. Oh. Okay, that makes some sense, I think. This thing here does require a property, so this is not a bug. This is not necessarily saying I did anything wrong or that we're not on the right track, but this thing does need a property component because it needs to set whether or not it found something. I can't see a world in which we care. Reset found tile. reverse. I think this is a property we're not going to end up using. So we're going to just name it something different so it doesn't impact any of the other stuff. Because there are other things that obviously care about found tile, found unit, etc. That use them as part of their conditionals. But in this situation, we're mostly making this call not to see whether or not we found something, but just to reset what the current tile target is. Is that right, actually? Is this the right ability effect? Because this one finds a tile by tile offset. But that doesn't actually change the preview versus non-preview. This only selects a tile. What ability effects can modify this? Find unit is valid. Find unit is valid. So if I want to reset back to this tile, as the thing we should be looking at as the damage effect, it can't be with that ability effect. I think it has to be with a find unit. So this find ability effect is based off of the target get tile position. Is that the same for the find unit version? Yes. So, okay, so it still does need to go backwards. So I think what we have to do is, after we have determined whether or not the selected tile is valid as a destination, we then need to not find tile by tile offset. We need to find unit by tile offset, which I think still needs, take a look at shove, still needs a property component for found unit. Doesn't have to be that, but it will need a property component. And it'll need to go backwards a step. And if the tile it finds there is not null, it then checks to see if there's a unit there. And if there is a unit there, it sets the unit and sets preview tile to null. Otherwise, it sets the unit to null and sets the preview. Okay. Holy smokes. And then this damage effect is already conditionally checking if we found a unit. I don't think that's true anymore. I think we go back to the original logic with this change. I think that was me reaching and not fully understanding what was happening. Holy smokes. I can see folks popping in and popping out on the Twitch side. It's just too much, I think. This was like, I need to do bug fixing and polishing, but maybe this is stuff I do off camera. Again, if there's YouTube comments of people who've got this far in the video and are following or enjoying, amazing. Love to hear from you. But otherwise, I think that this is undecipherable for just the pure amount of madness I'm having to keep track of in my head, which I cannot fully describe at any given moment. So this is working correctly. That's working correctly. If I walk right up, that's working correctly. Okay, so that all seems to be good. Let's check for errors. No errors, good. Let's see what happens when we try and target an enemy. So we're going to try the case that's been causing problems first, so aka this spot. We did not see an error, but we did not see the preview in the way that I would expect. But we didn't get an error. Oh, that's weird. Targeting under the tree. Interesting. Okay. I don't feel like it was doing that before this change. And then if we actually have them come to us and we have the shove effect, it does still perform it correctly with no errors. So we're not losing a turn. I think the preview is not clear in this situation, but I think we are at least set up correctly. So, okay, so we start the first bit. We check a tile in front of us. We look from the player this way. We check this tile. We first go in here and we check, okay, is there a unit on this tile? If yes, if there is a unit on that tile, let's bring it up. If there's a unit on that tile, we change our facing to it. We show our ability when we're actually performing. We do all this stuff. But in terms of preview, we're mostly just going to select that tile with a UI select here, which is really just saying select it blue, I think. Tile.display.select range. Yeah, so we're just selecting it blue, which is what the range is. Then we're going to come down into this part and we're going to try and select the tile in front of us to determine whether or not it can have a push effect. Okay. So the question is, why is it selecting... Why is the second one turning blue? And why is this one turning blue under the tree now? So something is selecting range. UI select. Select within range. Okay. Is it this effect? This is selecting movement and setting the move icon. I don't think we need this. Okay. I don't think it should be showing here anymore, or under there. Yeah, so removing that, this one here is causing it to just show the first tile as blue, which I think would make sense because it would show a preview of the damage or of the like attack symbol or something here, but it's not going to show the push kind of effect. Which, whether or not it stays this green with a foot icon that is not very clear, or whether or not that becomes something else later, is a different problem. But the fact of the matter is it's showing that this would be a targeted tile for attack, and it wouldn't be doing a push because there's no valid spot for them to be pushed into. So that is actually working correctly now. there's still just this weird question of like, why is it that we preview a select under something that is not a valid? I think that is just because of the way that we changed this find unit. Before, this used to always set this to found all the time. But now we've uncommented this code that actually checks whether or not there is a target tile there, or target unit. And therefore we get into like, it has to be to do with these changes we've made. Okay. I think this UI select shouldn't be displaying. If the target is on a non-walkable tile. And I think that's not necessarily a problem with the changes we've made. It's just by making this work properly, we've highlighted a piece of the ability that is not, or an aspect of the ability that is not being covered correctly. Yeah. I feel like I don't fully understand still. Yeah, if I fully understood, I would know why the blue is showing up under there. But it makes sense we do a UI select which sets this to blue one tile forward. I'm just curious why this used to not do this. Like, I feel like it should have always been doing it. But I don't feel like reverting all of the changes we've made just to go back to the original version to try and understand why. And maybe it was and we didn't notice, but I feel like we weren't seeing it select underneath before. But the way that I would think to resolve this properly would be that if we select a tile forward 1 as part of the finding a unit, if we go forward 1 and we check that tile, if that tile does not contain a unit, then we set that tile as the preview tile. And then if we get into here, that tile will be set as the preview and we will select it. So I think, what is valid doing again? It's checking to see if that tile contents is equal to null, but it's not contents, it's not walkable is the problem. And how do we check whether or not a tile is walkable? We did that somewhere else. There was a different tile that was checking the walkability of a tile. That was the tile type. One of the ability effects was doing this. Find tile by tile offset. So find tile by tile offset validates whether or not the tile we're trying to select is a valid walkable tile. But find unit by tile offset doesn't care. Oh, goodness. So the simple solution, quote unquote, would be to make it so that if the tile by default, the preview tile is also null, right? Where's tile direction? Yeah, by default that's going to be null. And the current unit is also null. Okay. So if tile dot tile type is a valid tile type, then we can set it to be the preview tile. And what is a valid tile type? Well, it's walkable. For the time being, seems reasonable. I think this fixes this bug. Does it cause knock-on effects because now we're not actually selecting the preview tile? I don't know. I don't think so. This stream makes me feel like we might want to take another stab at some of the ability system. There's a fundamental flaw that I'm starting to see form. Again, it's not that it's bad, it's just not as refined as I would like. Okay, sure. Sure. How does it flip? I think that makes sense. I figured something was going to break pretty hard, but by not setting the preview tile at all as part of find unit, other things are expecting that preview tile to be set. And then that just causes everything to get out of whack. So rather than directly having this decide not to set it, there's just more logic we need. Like, we either make a new ability effect that basically does this check and we gate the selection of a tile based off of this value, or we need more context than just preview tile. Alright, let's figure out what's happening. I have a feeling that this is not going the way that I would expect now. So this here is where this is going to be. So we are going to push in this direction. UI select at this point should have a tile. Preview tile is null. So it's going to try and get target get tile. So the target tile is our origin tile? That doesn't seem right. Something's setting this beforehand. Find tile by tile offset. $8.14. We're starting on 8.15. Interesting. Just seeing all the different versions of this. So it's setting this to forward one, forward one. But if I face this way, find tile by tile offset is going in the direction north here, and so it's getting an offset value of -1, and so finds a reverse facing. And so at this point we find that reverse face tile. Okay, so why? I'm sorry, what? Okay, at this level we should be doing found facing. Okay, try again. What is the offset here? 0, -1. So why do we never get... We should see a 0, +1 before this. It's actually really weird, because I would expect that we would see this value. I'm gonna just cancel. Am I doing shove properly? Or was I doing contextual? No, I definitely hit shove. We're going through the shove effect. Interesting. Are we even performing the right ability? What ability are we trying to perform right now? Process input. Yeah, we're trying to do shove with the direction north. Okay. So if we do, say, actually, let's try facing the opposite direction. So at this point, we should see that we are doing a south facing. We are, okay. So if we hit north, we get a... Somehow we're getting in here without hitting this value? Why are we not hitting this? Okay. Offset. 0, 1. Okay, so we get in here. It's not a valid tile. Wow, that's silly. Okay. Rip it up, start again. I see the problem. I don't like the problem, but I see the problem. So the reason we're setting the tile... So we're going in here, we're saying select this tile forward under the tree. It's going, okay, cool. Then face the target. So this is mostly just an ability effect that tries to make us look in the direction that we're pushing the button. And then saying, okay, now go back and select the previous tile. But because these tiles care about whether or not the tile selected is valid, it's finding that this is not a valid facing. And then, but this one here, it does find that the tile on the other side of us is valid, so it selects that. I think this little section here is just wrong. I wrote this really quickly as like a quick little, I'll just add this to an ability, it'll be really straightforward. And I think that this is just not well written, and I need to come back to it and see if I can find a better way of changing our facing. Because just embedding a like face target in that way isn't doing what I think it should be doing. I think it's too simplistic, and I think it needs to be looking in greater detail on whether or not there is a valid target, and if there is one, try and face it. Not just deciding to select a tile in front and then facing that direction and then unselecting. It feels a bit too hacky. Okay, so now if we come here, that kind of makes sense. So now this never happens, and we don't find anything valid here to select either. So the default tile is our origin tile, which is where we were first standing. So we UI select under our own feet. Okay. We have lost ourselves in the weeds. So what are we trying to achieve? I think it is that when we select things, we would like to have it so that if there is not a valid target, we preview some information about what that ability would do. I think that's still useful even in our game where we mostly want to just auto-perform the actions most of the time. But it's very complicated because there's a couple of different ways that this could operate. And we fixed the system so at least it's not saying that it's a valid target or giving any kind of errors or breaking the game based off of the preview. But the preview, so we've fixed it so that the previewing does not break the game. That is the main thing that we have done. But now the preview doesn't look right. And so that's kind of the rabbit hole we're running down now, where it's like, oh wow, this doesn't actually do what I think it does, or isn't previewing in a way that I would expect. And it's not that it's a bug per se. It's like I say to select a tile, or I say to select forward, face target, and then unselect. But like all these things are doing exactly how I wrote them. They're just, I didn't fully visualize every possible edge case. And so that means we probably need to write more code. Does pushing it into an unrevealed tree tile work right? We could see. We'll need to restart. It should, because even though the tile isn't revealed, the ability system still knows what that tile is. But we can take a look. But yeah, I think everything is now working correctly. I think everything's now working correctly. It's just not previewing correctly. And that's kind of just an underlying problem that's always been there. I just wasn't looking that closely at it. And in order to make it so it previews correctly, I either want to rework a little bit of how the ability system is working, right, so you can't push them into an unrevealed tile because pushing them reveals information. And it always reveals 2 away from where they are. So as you would push them, it would reveal. So I guess there's a question, if I ever made this push do like a 2 push or a 3 push, would it handle it correctly? That I'm less sure on. Yes, except it's not incremental in that way. So move to tile causes the defender's push movement to try and push the target to a target tile. So I could give it a further target, but I think what I'd like to do more would be to have a chain of push effects. So we'd probably want to have 2 of these. But it wouldn't be as much this as much as it would be like this. And then this would go forward 3. That might just work, I don't know. Goodbye, unlockable characters. I think that we're pretty much done at this point anyways. I feel like I faded pretty far. And I think I'd like to just think about some of these problems, because I think I just need to process this and not talk about it, but actually just quietly think about some of this. I'll probably keep poking at some of the more of the bugs throughout this evening, but I don't think there's much more we can really solve at this point at like a fundamental level. So it probably makes sense to just stop here. What did we even achieve? Is it just this? I was hoping to get through like at least these 3 things, but no, we just got the shove animation in. Excuse me, big yawn. We just got the shove animation in and made it so the shove no longer executes when there is no target. And somehow that took 3 hours. Interesting, it doesn't move twice. I would expect that was enough for that to just move the character twice, but... well, I guess technically it just needs to go forward 1 more. Oh, is this wrong? I think this might just want to be tile forward 1. That can't be right, because then the previews wouldn't be showing up correctly. Right? Yeah, that doesn't work either. I think the fact that we are constantly shifting which tile we have selected and we have to keep going back and forth feels wrong in some level. This made sense at some point when I was building it, but the more I use it, the more confusing it feels, because we have to then mentally keep track of every tile position. But having it shift like a little counter does allow for a lot more flexibility in letting things chain effect. Yeah, I think I just gotta think on it some more. And I'm also a little weirded out that we couldn't just add another push effect here. Like, that feels like the system should just operate that way, but I think, again, I'm just not visualizing how this works fully. Tile sites, push effect. Target get tile. Unless it's saying it's not a valid tile. which it should be fine. I'm going to dig into this a little bit before we call it, just because I'm curious. It feels like this should be okay. And I think I might better understand what's going on with my systems if I just look into this problem a little bit. All right, let's dig into it a bit more. So we're trying to figure out if I add this push effect and it uses this find tile by tile offset effect, and we look forward by a set amount from where we currently are targeting, I would expect that this would need to be one tile forward. And I'm confused actually, and realizing I'm not sure why this one even has to be 2 tiles forward. So let's look at find tile by offset. Let's have our breakpoints in here. Let's disable all breakpoints to start. And then let's set up and get in position. Okay, heading down. Okay, we are in position. Let's add our breakpoint back in. What happens when we push this button? So we get here, and we are trying to predict forward by an offset of 2. So this is that first tile. So we should check target point, $6.15, 2 forward. I'm curious. The current enemy target is 7.15. The origin tile is 6.15. Get tile in this context is returning the origin tile. I would expect that something would have modified or set the tile. Okay, so we know that the enemy is on the 7.15 tile, and we are trying to find the tile 8.15, and our origin is 6.15. Okay, so we are on 6.15, the enemy is on 7, and we have just found 8. Okay, so that's all fine. So then if we hit this one again, now we should be trying to do an offset of 1 forward, and our tile should be the origin, which is now 8.15. So that should be where we last left off. The last ticker, the last spot we were at, was at 8.15. So now if we go forward, it should be 9.15. And again, if we take a look at the target, the enemy is still on 7.15. Okay. So now we're going to try and find if that's a valid target. And we did find a valid target, and we're setting that. So we should get to the push effect then. And we should try and push them. We come in here. This tile that we find should be 9.15, which it is. We should do some previewing. If we come down to the actual sequence step part though, when we try to apply, this should be getting the tile target of 8.15, because this is now looping around to actually performing. So if we try again, when we hit this again, we should see another one where it should try and do a push of 9.15. Okay, so it should move the enemy twice. And it does. Okay. Odd, but I think working. Wow, it's really weird. Okay, so we select 2 in front of us, and then we only need to select 1 more in front of us to perform the push. Why does this one need to go forward too? Is it because we're setting the tile? Is this the first time we're having to set the tile? Does this not also set the tile? No, this only sets the unit. Ah, so this is the fundamental weirdness of my system. We have find unit by tile set, which checks to see if we can find a unit at a specific tile offset from where we're using our ability. But that doesn't change the origin point. But when we say find tile by tile offset, that does modify the origin point. And so we can check forward by 1 here, 1 offset, but when we want to then check forward for the second tile to see if it's empty and valid to be pushed into, we have to go 2 forward. But this is permanently changing our selector position. And now we are already on the 2 forward spot, so if we want to go a 3rd tile, we're only going 1 more space. And so if we keep adding these, we would see that we keep pushing continuously until we hit an invalid spot. So the question is, should we really be modifying the tile, like, selector, essentially? Let's just stop debugging for now. Should, when we move forward on these tiles, should we be modifying, like, this kind of counter that says, okay, now we're on this tile, now we're on this tile, now we're on this tile, now we're on this tile. Oh, I want to go back a tile, now I'm on this one. Now I want to go to the right 1 tile, so now I'm going to go down to this one. Do we really want to be changing our selector, or should all of this logic be based off of the origin position of our player? I have to do some digging into some of the other abilities I've created, because I want to know, why was it that I felt the need to set this? Does it get set anywhere else? No, everything else just assumes that the tile is the origin. Why did I feel the need to move the counter? It feels like it's only causing me headaches. My only kind of thought is that maybe by moving the counter, it makes it easier to keep track of abilities that are more dynamic. Okay, let's slow it down. Let's zoom in. If I hit this button, they should get pushed until they hit a wall, basically. Yeah, okay. I better understand how my system's working. And I understand the confusion. So anytime we do find tile, we are moving the origin point. We are moving the internal tile. But anytime we do find unit, we do not modify it. Demi Plume in Twitch chat says it's more sane to only change data at the end when the action is selected, I believe. Yeah, so I'm not actually changing the... Well, yeah, I don't know. I am kind of. All of this is happening as part of the preview. When we actually perform the ability, we basically wipe the slate clean and then redo it all, like, again, but in a final form. So there's like 2 versions. There's the prediction of what's going to happen, and then there's the actual execution of the final version. And the final version is mostly working fine. It's more the preview that's being a bit of a headache. That's funny, actually. Because of the way that I've built this, it can't preview off the edge of the map. Oh no, it's actually telling me where the edge of the map is. So where it's hitting feet right now is where it's previewing and knowing outside of the bounds there's an obstacle here. Whereas if I cancel and then go down one, it previews this all the way out to here because there isn't any trees or anything in the way. That's funny. Why would I need to change the target? That's a trickier thing to see because I need to look at all of these spots where I get tile. I feel like it must be related to charge. It is, and it's the same as push actually. The reason we changed the data is so that other things like charge and push can actually... The reason we changed the origin point is so that other things can, without knowing that it's been changed, just grab the current position of the cursor tile, essentially, and use it to decide where we're pushing something or where we're moving to. I would guess the move effect also does something similar. It does. So when we select a tile forward, we're doing that so that something else can use that selected tile forward as part of its logic. If we were to remove the idea of the tile being selected or changed, then none of the walking would work in our game. So I think part of the problem here is a bad naming convention. This says select tile for the name of what's happening here. And I think that's accurate. We are selecting a tile and we are keeping track of that tile. But the actual name is find tile by tile offset. And I think this name is misleading. I think this should also say select. It is not finding a tile, it is selecting a tile by tile offset. And I think that we should not have get tile, because that's not what we're doing here. We should have potentially get origin tile and get cursor tile. And cursor is like where we are, like as part of the preview, moving that tile along. And then if we want, we could have even a this find tile by tile offset. We could have two different versions. We could find tile from origin by tile offset, or find cursor tile, or select cur. Yeah, so there's a select tile from origin by tile offset effect, and then there is a select tile from cursor by tile offset. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a clarity issue. Okay. Okay, if I'm gonna rework the ability system a little bit, now's the time to do it before we start building a bunch of these abilities and then we have to rewrite all of them. Currently, we really only have shove, contextual move, light attack, and heavy attack. And most of these in turn are actually reusing a lot of the same like prefabs. So heavy attack is just using mostly a damaging effect, which damaging effect is using a hit effect. And then light attack is using a couple of different damaging effects in conjunction with some movement stuff. Yeah. I think I want to rethink how I select tiles to make this much clearer. I'd like to change the way I'm doing target facing. And I'd like to fix preview so that when I face a tree, it doesn't just select the tile under me. There is a question of like what it should preview here, but it definitely shouldn't just be under my own feet. Okay, cool. Well, this was a huge stream that went down a very deep rabbit hole, which it was not my intent. We have fixed shove executing when there is no target, and we have added the shove animation, but that is all we have done. I'd still like to fix these two things next. And the length of time it took me to solve this problem makes me think maybe we shouldn't move on to tutorials or anything else. We might want to spend a few more days just bug fixing and polishing, because it's revealing bigger issues. I still think we're in a good spot. Like, this looks like a video game, it feels like a video game, but there are some fundamental problems. Whoa, I was facing the wrong way. Oh, that's... Oh, right, because we're not changing facing right now. I removed that code. I mean, I do like that. Again, all the last thing I'll end on here, as much as I'm complaining or in a bit of a bind about, none of these words are right. As much as I'm like saying I want to rework some of the ability system, I still think the fact that I was able to basically copy this one child 4 times or 3 times, and then all of a sudden I was able to push an enemy a really far distance, is really cool. It's just, there's a little bit of confusion that I think just a little bit of renaming and maybe a little bit of reworking of the way that I handle the parameters would make this a lot clearer, so that I don't run into these problems where I spend 2 hours trying to figure out what the heck is happening. Because that's not sustainable. But the core system itself, I think, is quite good. It's just making it so it's very readable. That's the next thing. It's usable, but not readable. Cool. For now, though, I think this is going to be Tolhi signing out. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out. Appreciate people stopping by and giving the input. We'll be back. Let's see here. So, tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a relatively long stream. We're going to take a look at the save system. We will readjust and see where we're going to be. I think there's a chance we might want to continue to look at bugs and polishing. Technically, the save system working is kind of a bug, so maybe might start with that and see how much of a rabbit hole it is. I hope it's actually pretty straightforward to get it operational again, and then we can continue looking at more of the bugs and polish work. For now, though, this is going to be Tolhi signing out.